Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to the Football Diary podcast. You could have been with any podcast in the world, and you're here with me. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Joined once again by Myles. Pleasure to see you, man. How was your football week been?
Not too bad. I mean, not played any personally because I'm still nursing an injury. But I was saying not too bad. I watched Villa play Wolves the other day, and they were absolutely dreadful. I think
Shocking game.
I'm just on a high of watching Jose Mourinho's Roma get another 1-0 win. It's brilliant.
As predicted right here on this pod.
Always.
The Jose way. Yeah, we won't talk about Villa too much. You'll be pleased to hear.
Good.
But I want to start the pod by talking about Brentford's sensational victory against Chelsea. I mean, Chelsea were unbeaten for the whole month of March. I mean, you said before we went recording on this that it wasn't a convincing run for them, but the way Brentford blew them away was down to kind of one man's influence, really. Well, it was a team effort, but Christian Eriksen was so influential, wasn't he? He got his first goal in club colours. He looks like an astute piece of business, doesn't he? It's great to see him back. You can't help but be happy seeing Christian Eriksen play in this way, can you, really?
It's mad how quickly he slotted in and just looks like Christian Eriksen. Obviously, there was a spell of him he signed and then didn't play for a little while. He was kind of gathering his match fitness. But I don't think anyone would have anticipated that he would have just slotted in at that sort of elite level straight away. But he really is. And not just for his club side. I mean, we saw, and I think we might have spoke about it last week, the impact he had when he came on for Denmark as well. But to do it against Chelsea in the Premier League in one of Brentford's biggest ever wins, let's say.
Great result.
They're in the Premier League. It's a West London derby. It's a massive game for them. What a result that is. And yeah, it's wonderful to see him kind of spearheading that. But there was a lot of Brentford players that could get a lot of credit really in this result, I think.
Yeah, I think the way that they responded to going down to a sensational strike from Antonio Rudiger as well was incredibly, strong-spirited, strong-willed. And their form since they've had Eriksen playing that kind of football has been really impressive. He's changed the way they play. I mean, there was a lot of criticism when they kind of lost their momentum, Brentford, at the start of the season to the middle, where they were so predictable to play against and they were channeling a lot of their attacks down the wings, but they had no creativity in the middle, really. So he's provided that. And he just opened up so many doors, didn't he? I mean, aside from his own goal that he scored, he was the centre of everything good they did, wasn't he, really?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for Brentford in this was that they responded to going 1-0 down very quickly. Because you know what teams like Chelsea are like? Once they've got a lead and they can get a foothold in the game, it's really hard to grind out a result against them. But they bit back quite quickly. And there were signs of it in the first half that they could. And really, when you look at that Chelsea midfield that started this game, Brentford midfield was what won it for them. All three of them played incredibly well. And I think although Eriksen is obviously instrumental in their success of late, having Ivan Toney back in there massively helps. Although he didn't score in this game again, he's still connecting everything that they do. And I think he's a wonderful striker. I'm really interested to see where his career progresses to now, whether he stays at Brentford for another year or not, because there is potential there for a really good number 9. And it's the same with Eriksen, really. Does he remain at Brentford next season? Does he feel settled enough that he says, yeah, I just want to be here and happy and playing football? Because
let's not get too negative yet. I was trying to celebrate Brentford's win here. Like, this could be a turnaround in their football.
It's true.
You're right. There's so many questions being asked now because their players are looking like really valuable assets, aren't they?
Quite a few of them. I mean, Brian Mbeumo as well. I thought he was fantastic, and he's had a really strong season. And Wissa came off the bench and scored as well. So they've got great assets. And all of a sudden, that dip in form where we started to wonder if Brentford were going to slide into the relegation picture, they're out of it now. There's no way they're getting sucked into it at this point. And that's because they've got some real quality in the side, not just Christian Eriksen, but that Janelt that scored a brace in this game. I've seen him play for Brentford a couple of times now, and he looks like a really tidy player as well. So great result for Thomas Frank's men. And it would be interesting to see what Brentford do next season, really, whether they can invest in the summer or not. It would be exciting to see him playing good football again.
Well, that's interesting to consider, actually, because obviously Eriksen, there was question marks over his fitness from a few people. And I know I was genuinely worried whether he could commit to playing 90 minutes of top level football again. I think we all were slightly worried by that. Doctors obviously gave him the all clear. Brentford at the time, I mean, in hindsight, it sounds ridiculous, but they took, let's face it, a bit of a gamble, didn't they, taking him on? And he's absolutely proved beyond any doubt that his fitness is not an issue. He's almost not lost any of the spark that he had prior. In fact, you can almost see like a zest in the way he plays. Like he's really grateful to be out there on the pitch. And that's got to have influenced the outlook of his teammates as well. Because if you see Christian Eriksen lining up alongside you, giving everything he's given after everything he's been through, there's no excuse for you not to, really. I definitely feel like he's raised Brentford's game across the whole team.
He definitely has. And obviously there was already talk that Antonio Conte was looking at him in terms of in the summer, because he did only sign a short-term contract with Brentford. And you wonder whether a reunion with Spurs and with Conte would be an even more romantic ending to this story, really. It's just brilliant to see him back on the football pitch, of course, but it's not just a narrative anymore. Because, of course, when something like that happens, you're all consumed with the story behind it and just go, oh, isn't it nice that he's playing football? Well, no, it's not just nice that he's playing football. He's excellent at football and he's doing that job as well. And I think he deserves a lot of credit, not just for the sort of mental struggle that he'll have had to have overcome, but the fact that physically he just looks like a fantastic footballer again. It's not about the incident anymore. It's about him progressing his career. And that's brilliant that he can do that. And Brentford are definitely gaining a wonderful asset from the fact he's doing that.
Yeah, well, he's only 30 as well. I think I have to remind myself, you feel like he's older because he's been around for so long. And he started out at Ajax so young, but no, 30 with plenty to play for still.
And it's interesting when you look at Chelsea, because really, we started the season, I think both you and I said that we thought they'd win the league. And for the longest time, it was a 3-horse title race.
Yeah.
And there was no room for anyone to break into that top 3. Now, all of a sudden, it's not impossible to think that Chelsea could let third go. They'll probably finish in the top 4, you'd imagine. But with Tottenham really finding their form, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, and Arsenal obviously looking really strong, Chelsea need to sort themselves out quickly. And with the uncertainty around that club as well, who knows where that could lead them next season? It's a really odd one for them. It was a really poor result from their point of view.
Well, we kind of talked up really their strength in depth, didn't we, as one of the main reasons why they could go far. But you look at their starting 11 and their back 4 looked old, you know. Yeah. Marcos Alonso, he's 30, 31. Thiago Silva's obviously 37, 38.
Yeah.
Tony Rudiger's at about 29, I think. So he was the youngest of the back 4. Yeah. So their defence looked vulnerable, I think, especially to the kind of pace that Brentford were attacking at. That really caught them out. Their midfield, featuring Ruben Loftus-Cheek, who, again, I can't see him having a future in a Chelsea team in going forward. I didn't think he would feature much this season, so he was central to their midfield, which got completely overrun. And then even their forward line, like, where's Romelu Lukaku? Why is he not starting? I know Havertz is a fantastic player, and to be fair, he's the one that's kind of coming out of this with more credit. He makes some really good runs. He makes things happen. But Chelsea just aren't. Well, they didn't for this game work. And there's been a few occasions where it's looked a bit like that, really, hasn't there?
I do wonder whether the top 3 in the league ran away with it so much at the start of the season that we kind of thought they were better than they are. Because even now, I just wonder if the rest of the competition in the league is poor. Because I watched Liverpool at the weekend. I've seen City beat Burnley, and neither of them were particularly inspiring. I thought Liverpool were really average to watch, but just who they were playing was so much worse that they kind of got away with it. So it's quite nice to see a team like Brentford take a game to Chelsea and actually try and beat them at their own game. And it works. They are vulnerable, these teams at the top. It's not as elite as we necessarily give them credit for, I don't think. I just think that there's a very mixed bag below them.
It's weird because you think of the Chelsea strength in depth, but then you look at the players they've sent out on loan. You can easily see Conor Gallagher stepping into that midfield now, can't you, and making a difference. Armando Broja making a difference as well. They've both had great seasons away from the club. There's a lot of questions for Thomas Tuchel to ask of his squad in the summer, which again is not a bad position to be in. And they've still got the Champions League. They've still probably got top four still wrapped up, I'd imagine. Whether that's 3rd or 4th, we don't know. But it still could be a very good season for them. But so much below where we saw them, and I think many others did as well.
Yeah, and I think when we talked about the strength in depth that Chelsea had, we were mainly referring to those attacking areas because, of course, at the start of the season, we were really excited to see how they would gel the likes of Ziyech, Pulisic, Werner, Havertz, Lukaku, and Mason Mount in attacking positions. But when you look and think, Timo Werner's still underwhelming, Lukaku's definitely been underwhelming. That depth isn't really there anymore. And like you say, at the back, they look really like they need some reinforcement there. And they've just triggered an option in Cesar Azpilicueta's contract, an automatic extension, because otherwise they were going to be stuffed next season, to be honest. Who knows what's going on with that? We're still waiting to see what's going on with the bidding process and who's been successful. There's talk of a consortium being led by John Terry being one of the front runners now. So who knows?
Yeah, whatever they need is going to be expensive. I think it's fair to say.
Definitely.
And whether Tuchel will be the person to be in charge of that as well, I don't think he even knows the answer to that question. So yeah, uneasy times for Chelsea, but it's one result. Let's not blow it out of proportion. They tend to struggle after international breaks as well. I think they did the same last season and lost to West Brom. Sam Allardyce's West Brom. Do you remember?
Yeah.
5-0 or 5-1. So they've capitulated in similar circumstances in the past. So it's one of them days you'd like to think, but well done to Brentford still.
Massive win for them, yeah. And like we say, that's their season pretty much done now in terms of the goals that they wanted to achieve. They would have gone into this season thinking, let's consolidate, make sure we get a respectable finish and aren't in a relegation battle. And they've done that really successfully. So, and that's including really big injuries. I think David Raya missed a massive portion of this season. Ivan Toney had a good spell on the sidelines. So yeah, Brentford are brilliant. I'm really enjoying watching them at the moment. So great result for them.
Moving on to Tottenham now, because top four seems to be almost a two-horse race now, with United definitely falling behind quite a bit, which we won't touch on too much. But Spurs beat Newcastle 5-1. It was a really, really resounding victory and thoroughly deserved as well. Now, the system seems to be clicking into place at just the right time. And Antonio Conte, to his credit, has really persisted with his philosophy, really. And the players that he picked this time around weren't particularly nailed on first 11 starters, and all of the goal scorers were a bit odd, really. They weren't regulars for the team, but the fact they slotted into his system so seamlessly and the result was so resounding must be encouraging for Spurs at this stage of the season, surely.
Massively. I mean, you can't not be encouraged when you see that they're now in fourth place. Granted, Arsenal have 2 games in hand, and you definitely expect them to beat Crystal Palace this evening with the way that they've been playing. But also, no team has scored more goals in 2022 than Spurs. They've scored 30 goals already this year.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, they're on a real incline in terms of their attacking output. Obviously, 5 in this game really helps. But to me, when you see that front 3 in particular of Kane, Son and Kulusevski, they're fantastic. They seem to be working really well together. They operate with a lot of pace in the wider areas with Son and Kulusevski. And Kane has found that new ability to just drop deep and be a playmaker, as well as being one of the best finishers in the league. So it's a wonderful problem to have for Conte, that now people like Bergwijn, who were really are relying on cameos off the bench and getting goals. So there's depth in that Tottenham attack, which is really benefiting them. And they're finally seeming to piece together a defence and midfield that looks efficient. Because that's what we've said all season with Spurs. We wondered whether they would be able to structure any sort of centre-back pairings or anything that would work. Was the midfield too weak? Well, they brought in Bentancur, who slotted in brilliantly. I think he looks really, really good. Still disappointed he didn't come to Villa. And at the back now, they found this new role for Ben Davies. Romero is finally coming through as the player we expected. And if you look at Spurs' win record with Eric Dyer in the side this year, he's been brilliant. He's had a really good role at Spurs, and I thought
fairly criticised. Really, he didn't deserve the criticism he got. I mean, I was one of the people that probably did criticise him, but I think because he's so versatile, that's almost his weakness. But to see him at centre back and doing okay, that's encouraging.
That's such an Antonio Conte thing to do, though. A versatile player that he can utilise, who can be quite heavy-handed on the pitch and kind of get himself about. Conte loves that from his defensive players, and him and Højbjerg are pretty much made for that sort of system. So I'm not surprised to see them getting some sort of success from that. They do need to be more consistent still, Spurs. This is a brilliant win. Don't forget, Newcastle went on their longest ever unbeaten run not longest ever, in the last 20 years or something like that? Just a few weeks ago. Now, all right, this is their 3rd loss in a row, so it might be a bit of a reality check that they're not quite with the big boys yet, even if they've got the money. But I thought Spurs looked excellent. And like you say, it was systematic. That's what won them this game. The fullbacks played incredibly well. You've got Doherty playing as a left wing back all of a sudden, but he played brilliantly and he popped up with a goal as well. And Emerson Royale scored as well, which is just bizarre. But no, a really good win for Spurs. Really, really encouraging.
I think for me, it's the link-up play between the front three, which I don't think we've seen since the days of Christian Eriksen was part of that trio, or when Lucas Moura was actually in good form.
Yeah.
He's been struggling, but to see Kulusevski step into that attacking trio seamlessly, really, is encouraging. Do you think he's one that will stick around at Spurs?
Yeah, 100%. So I think they've got an option to buy this summer and an obligation to buy the year after if he meets certain clauses. Well, I'll be really surprised if Spurs don't try and activate that as soon as possible, because he's looked fantastic and he looks really well suited to the Premier League, because I think in his youth career, he wasn't necessarily a winger. He was more of a midfielder, and he's kind of become this winger as he's got, and I was going to say older, but I think he's only 20 still, or 21.
Yeah.
But what that means is he's got physicality and pace, and that is perfect for a Premier League winger. He's very direct as well. And we've seen over the last few years that those sort of direct wingers have been quite successful in the Premier League. You think of players like Rafinha or St. Maximan at Newcastle, players that can kind of scare a fullback and run in behind that space that fullbacks leave when they're attacking now. It works well for them. And Kulusevski, I think he's slotted into Spurs' attack brilliantly.
Well, you mentioned when they signed him that he hadn't really set the world alight at Juventus. No. So what were Juventus doing wrong, and what's Conte doing to get the best out of him now? What's the difference?
Well, Juventus had really high hopes for him, obviously, because he impressed so much when they brought him in. And when he first came into the side, he did look quite sharp. His first few appearances for Juventus were really, really encouraging roles. But I think since Allegri came in this season, he just was peripheral, and he wasn't part of the system that Allegri likes to play. He doesn't necessarily use a lot of wingers, Allegri. If you think about the system, he relies on more the likes of Cuadrado getting forward on that right-hand side than Kulusevski. So I think it's just the right move at the right time for him now. And Conte, we know, likes to play that system where he does have wing-backs that will support and get forward, but also have wide forwards. So you overload the flanks, and Kulusevski is very good at exploiting that space and then cutting inside. We've seen it a few times already. I think he looks really sharp.
I think he's one of them players that sort of makes Son Heung-min play to his best as well. And I think since he's been at the club, Son's actually stepped up his game. He's probably in some of the best form of his life. He's one of my favourite Premier League players to watch at the minute, and overall, I think he's just fantastic. Begs the question, though, what does this do for Harry Kane if Spurs do get Champions League football? Does he suddenly think I can stick around, or is he still looking to get that Man City move that he wants?
He won't get a Man City move now. Man City won't go in for him this summer. I'm quite confident of that. They signed Julian Alvarez, and I think they'll be looking quite heavily at Erling Haaland as well. I can't imagine them going back in for Kane with the kind of figures that are being touted. The thing with Kane is I think he'll have 2 more years after this season on his contract. And he's already talked really highly about Antonio Conte and how much he likes working with him. And I think his options to move on are becoming more and more limited. Really, the most obvious destination for him if he leaves Spurs is probably Man United. Do you want to make that move right now? I think
Harry Kane, absolutely no. Definitely not.
The only way I can see that happening is if Pochettino does get the job and he thinks, oh, that might be a good fit for me now. I'll get the big move. I'll move away from Spurs. I'll be the guy that spearheads Pochettino's attack, a bit like when Van Persie moved to United to get them some success. But I can't see it. I don't think he'll move this summer. I think he'll stay at Spurs again. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a new contract from him if Conte signs a longer deal as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it does depend on Conte. If he's as complimentary about him as you say, that's so important to him, is having a coach there that will try and play to his strengths and get the best out of him. That didn't happen for a while once Pochettino left, did it really? And it's that feeling of being wanted and needed.
He definitely liked working under Mourinho, and I think Mourinho got the best out of him. If you look, last season, he was top scorer and top assist leader for the league. Yeah. Mourinho definitely improved his game.
As a goal scorer, I think. But there's not more than just a goal scorer. That's the thing. And I think if you exercise all those parts of his link-up play, for example, that's when he's at his best for me.
It's ridiculous. And then when you think about the summer that Spurs had, when they had no clue who was going to be the manager, I'm not surprised that he wanted to move away because they weren't matching his ambition. If Spurs can show genuine sign that they are matching his ambition with a coach like Conte, if they spend some money this summer, Conte is a serial winner. So if I'm Kane, I'm thinking, okay, I'll give you another year. And then by then, he's got 12 months left on his contract. It's much easier for him to move on if he wants to next summer. because Spurs will need to cash in on a prized asset. So
True.
I don't think he'll be going anywhere next year.
Okay. So in terms of the race for top four, obviously Arsenal play tonight, Monday, as we speak. They've still got 2 games in hand, but Spurs have edged into the top four, I think, for the first time in a while, albeit on goal difference and albeit 2 games behind what Arsenal still have to play. It's still points on the board. It's still a big turnaround from a Spurs perspective, and they've still got to play each other, of course. So that is still, well, it's always a big game, but it's now become absolutely huge, hasn't it, for both teams?
If you think about the key areas of the league that need to be decided at the moment, it's really good because all of them need to play each other still. We'll talk obviously later, I'm sure, about Man City playing Liverpool this weekend. Spurs have still got to play Arsenal, and then Everton have got games against Burnley and Watford to come still. It's brilliant. Like you couldn't ask for better fixtures really at this point in the season. It probably will come down to whoever wins the North London derby will get fourth, which is amazing. What a cup final that is going to be like. And that game doesn't really need much spicing up as it is. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. I think at the moment, I think Arsenal have the edge in terms of they look like they're on a very good run of form. They look quite consistent. They look like a great side. Yeah. But I do worry about them when they come up against bigger opposition. And although Spurs really, Arsenal have the capability of beating, I just hope that their mentality sticks for that game and they can get through it. It's going to be a fascinating one. I can't predict who's going to get fourth at this stage. I think it will be Arsenal, but it's too tight.
You have to say that because of your family connections, though, don't you?
Yeah,
you'd be in trouble if you did.
I'll be in a lot of trouble if I said otherwise.
I think I just want to see as a neutral a game where there's no stupid mistakes, where everyone plays to the absolute optimum. Because both teams on their day look great, and I just don't want to see anyone messing it up. I don't want to see any red cards. You know,
I was going to say
North London derby, but
it's got a Granit Xhaka red card written all over it. That game.
It needs to be a contest, and I think as a neutral, that's what I want to see. But these things don't always play out like that. There's probably going to be a very tense affair at the end of the day.
Well, unless Arsenal lose to Palace tonight, and then all of a sudden it's a different conversation. But I can't see
again. Could happen though. Do you know? It's one of them seasons.
Yeah, it's doing well there, but I think Arsenal have enough.
Well, it's Vieira as well. Added spice, narrative. You know, we love that.
I'd probably roll over and let them have it.
No, he's got a point to prove, hasn't he? That's his future employer, surely.
Yeah, maybe.
So moving on to slightly below the top four is where United now currently sit and probably will end up. I think the way it was spoken about after the game with the draw against Leicester was no good to either team. But United seem to be out of the picture now. I think they've kind of resigned themselves to that. West Ham, however, look like they're really competing for a European place with United. Whether that be 5th, 6th or 7th, we don't know yet. But they were convincing in their victory. And I think that now puts them in a really strong position to end the season on a really positive note, doesn't it? I mean, albeit the result came against very poor opposition again in Everton, who are just so unpredictable at the moment. But a 2-1 win nonetheless. And Jared Bowen back in the team made a big difference. They look decent, don't they? At home, it always feels like such a big occasion now. The way that the London Stadium was turned around and to be this cauldron is great spectacle for us to watch now. They look like a team that has the support of the fans, which again, 2-3 seasons ago looked unlikely. But yeah, they look good value for the win.
Yeah, and I think Burnley and Watford will be really incredibly grateful because with the Lyon game coming this week, I think a lot of us anticipate that West Ham might have one eye on that and not really go for this game quite in the same way. But actually, David Moyes talked about it as, I think he called it a dress rehearsal for midweek. So they really did take it seriously, and it was a great win for them again. You are right. You kind of expect anyone to beat Everton at the moment, even if Newcastle couldn't. And when they're getting a man sent off every single game, it becomes slightly easier. When they're playing Mason Holgate as a centre midfielder, it becomes even easier. It just
got a good goal though, to be fair.
I thought he scored a really good goal, and then I saw how big the deflection was on it, and it kind of took it away from me, to be honest. No, I think it was really encouraging for West Ham. With Lanzini out, Bowen just coming back from injury, you wondered what their attacking output would really be like. And again, Antonio caused all sorts of issues. Bowen got a goal, which would be fantastic for him because that's the last thing a player like that needs. Hit wonderful goal-scoring form, and then get an injury and really struggle to pick the momentum back up for the run-in at the end of the season. And actually carried on where he left off. And that'll be a real lift for him and David Moyes massively. But I actually am really enjoying watching West Ham. I've never really been a big fan of West Ham for any reason, but at the moment it's quite easy to get behind them because they are the ones most likely to disrupt the apple cart, whatever the saying is, because they do look strong as a unit now, which you wouldn't have anticipated that 12 or 18 months ago.
They're just fun. Great fun to watch. They've got players that do attack at some pace and they can pick each other out. Their first 11 is so strong for that reason because they find each other and they've got players that just get the crowd off their feet, which is why the atmosphere is probably as good as it is lately at the London Stadium. But with a free kick like the one Aaron Cresswell scored as well,
brilliant.
It's pretty special, wasn't it? I mean, there's another one to talk about this weekend with James Ward-Prowse, but he does that every day, every week of his life. But this one, it was a great way to start the game, really.
Yeah, and David Moyes was talking about it again after the game, and I think he said that he's never seen Cresswell score a free kick, so he was a bit annoyed at him for shooting at first. But it was almost like he'd watched that Gareth Bale one the other day and thought, right, let me have a go at that, because he put it in pretty much the same spot. It was brilliant. I thought it was a really good hit. And he's had a great time at West Ham. I think he's quite underrated as what a servant he's been to that club, but also as a Premier League fullback, he's very consistent, Aaron Cresswell. And someone that maybe has been overlooked internationally for a little while because he's got a great delivery. He's good from a dead ball. I think he's a very good utility player for West Ham too. So, a lot of likable characters. And it's so bizarre because going into the pandemic, West Ham were an absolute shambles, if you remember. And they brought David Moyes in that first time to basically stop them from getting relegated. And what a job he has done there. I think a lot of Everton fans will be looking over at that dugout and thinking, what have we let go here? And why didn't we go back sooner? Because
Everton and United fans, mate, in some ways, I look at him and think, do you know what, that's probably an upgrade on what we've had lately.
And I think when you look at Everton, they've got to be seriously worried now because the thing is, there's been a lot of conversation about Everton being too big to go down, but people might have said the same about the likes of Sunderland, Leeds when it happened to them, even Villa at a time. But they're just not getting a run of form together. They've won 3 games all season. That's awful for Everton. You can't anticipate that they're going to pick up enough points to get them out of this battle now. And really, if you're Burnley and you're Sean Dyche's Burnley, you're not worried about playing this Everton side. That is you going, right, there's the 3 points we need. And if you're Roy Hodgson at Watford, you're targeting that game as well. But Everton don't look like they're able to target any game right now because they look so shaken by what's going on.
Do you know what? They're kind of architects of their own downfall, though, because Richarlison played okay. He missed an absolute sitter, which should have really kept them in contention. But then the sending off was just, you expect better from Michael Keane, really, don't you? He's one of them senior players who you think, keep your head. Come on, that's just not the time. It was like in a time when the game was still on a bit of a knife edge as well. Killed it as a contest. So, Everton, there's a bit of bad luck there, but their players are responsible for it fundamentally. And we've said at the start when Frank Lampard first came to the club, what a gamble he was, first of all. But then they've got players in their ranks who you thought might make a difference. So Dele Alli hasn't really done anything yet.
That's what I was going to say to you. You say it's a bit of luck, but when you've got someone like Dele Alli that you've brought in, and Lampard, honestly, you would have thought he would be the one to get the best out of him. He didn't even bring him on.
No.
In a game where you need a win. I realise I also said that they've won 3 times this season. I think it's 3 times this year, sorry.
But I was going to say it's more than 3. I think it's only Burnley that are that bad.
I think they've won 7, but still, because they started the season quite well, Everton, really. And I think a lot of people would have had hope for them. But I think they're just exposing how weak their squad actually is now, because they brought Dominic Calvert-Lewin off in this game and didn't have a striker to replace him. Obviously, Van der Beek got injured and they had to play Holgate in centre midfield. But you have to wonder, well, why has Ali not come on? I do wonder whether they're not going to keep Ali after this season, because the deal that they've struck with Tottenham is dependent on how much he plays. So maybe they're already looking at it going, he's too expensive for us if we get relegated, because financially they're a state. Let's not forget that they're in the middle of building a new stadium. If they get relegated, this is really, really bad news for a club that's been signing players from Barcelona for the last few years on massive wages. It's not looking good for Everton at all.
No. Are you worried about them from a relegation point of view then, if that's the way you're talking? It sounds like you are.
Oh, massively. Now, that win against Newcastle has honestly saved them a lot of trouble. But
True.
I would not be surprised if both Burnley and Watford beat them. And that's what they've got to avoid, because I think now they've played the same amount of games as Burnley, but they've got 4 more points. So if Burnley beat them, that's a point all of a sudden. And I look at Everton's fixtures now. I don't know where their points are coming from. Where do they pick up points between now and the rest of the season?
No.
And they've got this awful disciplinary record of late. Lampard doesn't really seem to know what to do with this squad. And I don't necessarily think that's his fault. It's just a terrible squad it's so mixed. It's not got any sort of coherent plan. And then he's brought in players in January that we don't see. Well, I know he's not the best. I've seen him at Villa. He's not great, but they've not even used El Ghazi yet. And if you're struggling to score goals, try him. I don't know. I won't be surprised if Everton fall into it now, to be honest. I could see Burnley getting out of it.
Do you know what? I think based on the fact that Burnley have been here before, based on the fact that Watford have been here before, Hodgson's been here before, this is new territory for Everton. This is new territory for Lampard. I absolutely think you're right. I think it only takes a defeat against one of those teams for them to suddenly start thinking, we're in trouble. Because I don't think they are. I think they're in a bit of denial about it. I think Lampard is.
And you talk about that squad, and people talk about, that squad's too good to go down and things. People who aren't Everton fans and probably don't watch the club too closely would talk about them being too good. But I think the telling thing is, if they did get relegated, which players would move straight back to the Premier League? You'd probably have Richarlison would get a big move. Calvert-Lewin would get a move. Short of that, are there any others? Maybe Pickford if he wanted to leave, and maybe Yerry Mina?
Definitely Pickford, yeah. Someone would take Dele Alli because Spurs wouldn't keep him, that's for sure.
I don't know. Maybe he'll find that the Championship's got to be his next step, because he's had this chance to move to another Premier League club right at the bottom of the league, and it's not working there either. He's not looked too bad when he's played for him. I don't really get what's going on there.
It's so crazy. Like you say, too good to go down on paper, but it's just a bit of a mess of different managers' philosophies and signings. A bit like Man United in some ways, where each player has been spent a lot of money on. They're on high wages, and it could cripple them if they went down financially.
Whereas Burnley, they are at least orchestrated by one man. Now, that man is Sean Dyche. He's not Mourinho or Guardiola or Klopp, but at least they're, like you say, they've been there before. They're a coherent team that know what their roles are, and they just need a few results, really. You can see Burnley getting a few draws between now and the end of the season and potentially beating Everton. And then all of a sudden, it's done. So, West Ham, good win. Everton, could be bye for them, really, couldn't it?
Yeah, looks that way. I think we've talked ourselves into them being relegation candidates more so now than they were before the pod. I definitely feel like you've convinced me, because I wasn't sure. But like you say, if they don't pick up points where it counts, it's going to look really tough for them, isn't it?
Yeah.
But moving on to the highlight of last week, which was the World Cup draw. So this has been quite exciting to see. It's still absolutely crazy to think that it's going to take place in November and December. I can't get my head around that at all. I'm trying to plot time off work, but it's November and December. Do you know what I mean? It's such a strange time of year. But England have got a very interesting group. They're in Group B. So I'll bring up now what that looks like so we can sort of talk about it as a talking point, really, from an England perspective. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you've got two home nations that could be that final seed. You've got the USA, who we haven't beaten at a World Cup, I don't think. And you've got Iran, who politically, between the three of those other teams, is politically charged. So they're also on kind of home turf in the Middle East. So they'll probably have quite a few fans behind them as well, you'd imagine. They're one of the big hitters in the Asian division.
Yeah.
So, it's difficult. I think on world rankings, Group B is probably one of the better averages, which is mad.
If you combine the world rankings, it is technically the hardest group, but it's not. It's not at all.
But then you've got obviously that final berth, which I'm sure you'll talk about in a minute, which is going to be one of either the two home nations, Scotland or Wales, or the Ukraine. So in terms of emotional charge, it's just laced with different energy, isn't it?
This group is narrative central, but there's a few of them that are like that. But no, honestly, without sounding too much like a biased fan, England have to top this group. There would have been very few draws that England could have got where they wouldn't have been the favourites to top the group because of their recent form in international tournaments, which is fantastic. But I look at this group and think it is a favourable draw. If you look at some of the second-seeded teams that we could have picked up, the likes of Netherlands, Germany were in there as well. Denmark, maybe. We'll be happy with what we've got, definitely. I think it's really telling that the conversation has been more on what the story will be rather than what the performance will be for each game. Because there is, like you say, narrative everywhere. And don't get me wrong, there will be tests within that group. If Wales qualify, we've seen England struggle against Wales. If Scotland qualify, we saw England struggle against Scotland in the Euros. So it's not a given that they'll win each game, but I'm really happy with it as a draw. I think the biggest threat, obviously, is probably the US, but they kind of flattered in their qualifying campaign. It took them a long time to get through. They only qualified on the last day, and Canada flew through their group. But this is a very different American team to I think we've ever seen at an international tournament, because all of a sudden it's always a weird one with America, isn't it? Because sport is such a massive part of their culture, but they've never really adopted soccer. The amount of money that's invested into sport in the US is why in pretty much every single other sport, they are at the very top of the game. If you look at the Olympics, then it's always the US at the top because they have the facilities to succeed. Now that's finally starting to come through in football. And you can see some big players at big clubs across Europe now. And we've not really seen that in the US before. We've seen the likes of Dempsey in the Premier League. But now all of a sudden you're talking about Christian Pulisic at Chelsea, Weston McKennie at Juventus, Dest at Barcelona. You've got Tyler Adams at RB Leipzig, Giovanni Reina at Dortmund. When was the last time that a US team had players of that sort of caliber at very top level clubs? So it's not going to be a walkover, but England have got to be confident. And really, this is a chance to build some momentum before the knockout stages of the group. They've got to be looking for 3 wins. I honestly think that. I think they've got the depth to do that.
I think you're reluctant as an Englishman to sound arrogant saying that. I think we've been guilty in the past of being arrogant when we've absolutely not been anywhere near the strength we are now. But I think if you looked at these teams and played them in a friendly capacity, you'd imagine us absolutely annihilating them each individually on our day without any pressure. So that's the difference for me, is how do each of those teams respond to a World Cup environment? We know Scotland will raise their game if they're through. We know Wales will, because they bring all their fans with them as well, and it changes it. It's like a Premier League fixture, isn't it? So I'm hoping neither of those get through. And then for the others, it literally is on their day, how much will they bring to this game? Will it be enough to overcome whatever England have to offer? And that's another thing. It's all on England, really, to play the way we know they can play as efficiently as they can. Because like we've said before with this England team, the starting 11 isn't actually decided. We know most of the starting 11, but the rest of the places are kind of up for grabs, mostly up front. So we could interchange depending on who the opponents were. And that'd be the interesting thing for me to see what Gareth Southgate does with each of those fixtures.
I'm not sure that most of the 11 is decided, to be honest. I think there would be very, very few players that are an automatic start at the moment, because I think partly because the tournament is still a way off and you don't know who's going to be available through injury or what sort of form players are going to be going into the tournament or something. But I think short of Harry Kane, and probably John Stones and probably Maguire, I don't think anyone else is a guaranteed start, really. Declan Rice?
Okay. Rice absolutely is,
That's probably it. Those 4.
I think I'd like to think Jude Bellingham has played himself into contention, to be fair.
Exact contention. I don't think he's guaranteed, though, because he loves Henderson, he loves Phillips as well. So Phillips might not even make the squad at this rate because he's been injured so much. We don't know. But I think you're right. England fans have tendencies of sounding quite arrogant going into a tournament because they've never had any reason to back it up. We've had 2 very good tournaments now in a row, and Southgate's built a great philosophy. And this generation of English talent not only looks brilliant on paper, but actually gels together very well. Southgate's done a really good job at almost making it like a club squad. Grealish came out after the last friendly, and I saw an interview with him where he was saying that he knows that a lot of players used to be quite reluctant to go on international duty, but they all absolutely love getting that call up now because their camp is just brilliant for them. So I think England fans, I don't think it is arrogance this time. I think it can be realism and confidence and optimism that actually we should be going into this tournament thinking whoever we come up against will give them a game, because in the Euros, we were 1 kick away from winning it. in the World Cup, really, we probably should have beaten Croatia on reflection. I'm hoping we've learned from those experiences and grown a little bit. And actually, some extra quality has come into the squad since then. I would argue that the squad that we'll take to this World Cup is better than the squad that we've had from the last 2 tournaments.
It is, yeah. I think that's the thing. We need to turn how confident we are as a team or becoming as a team into actual kind of realized arrogance, because I think all the best teams have it. Man City have an arrogance about them. They have a swagger, but they've walked the walk. They've proven they can do it. So have England now, and I think in the past it's just been completely misplaced arrogance where we haven't had the right to claim to be favourites because we've done nothing in a major tournament prior to the last couple of tournaments. Really, it's been a barren run for England fans. But now, like you say, worthy to be amongst the favourites. I think it's fair to say. Hesitant to say it, but maybe that's the confidence that the players need to have.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what about you though? What about the rest of the draw? Is there anything that caught your eye?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where there's a group of death, but there's a lot of very evenly matched groups. I think the one that looks good for me is Portugal, Ghana, Uruguay, and South Korea. There's some very good players in that team, that group.
That's probably the group that's the most even, because actually the irony of this draw is the reason there's no group of death is because you and I could probably pick the teams that are going to qualify now. Like going into it, there are 2 very obvious teams that are going to qualify from each group that you would expect. Yeah, that's done. Now, there'll be a few exceptions to that. I think the groups that I'm really looking forward to seeing are Group F, because I think Morocco and Canada could actually do something. I think Canada could be really like the underdogs of the tournament, the dark horses that will get a little bit further than we'd anticipate.
Let's use that term already, dark horses.
Not to do anything major, but if Canada got to the quarterfinal, or even if they got out of the group, to be honest, I think we'd all go, flipping heck, that's impressive.
Very
and Morocco are the same. I think they've got a bit of potential to upset a few people. And you're right, Group H is probably the most balanced of all of them. And there's obviously so much narrative in there because of the Uruguay-Ghana World Cup game a few years back. But yeah, it's not the most exciting draw I've ever seen, I'll be honest.
It's Spain, an unknown. Like we've never seen, well, probably never will see Qatar at a World Cup again. Canada, again, in my lifetime, I haven't seen Canada in a major international tournament. So there's a few ones there that I'm like, yeah, let's see how they do.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a novelty more than anything. Like you say, there's no real standout groups where you think that could be tasty. Group H for me is the one. I think Group G could be a difficult one to get out of because the quality, again, is pretty decent. Serbia and Switzerland are kind of seasoned tournament veterans now, both teams.
Yeah.
So they could be a difficult one. Really interested to see how Senegal do as African champions and whether they can take some kind of momentum going into it. They were lucky to be there, to be fair. They beat Egypt on penalties and they should not have had that advantage, the lasers, all of that. They're lucky to be there, but they are African champions.
I think they might be the only African side that get out of the group stage as well. Looking at the draw, I mean, you could potentially see Morocco pipping Croatia potentially, but other than that, I'm not confident in Ghana because I thought they were really underwhelming at the African Cup of Nations. Cameroon, I really like the look of Serbia. When you look at their attacking players, Vlahovic will be at his first World Cup, you'd imagine. Mitrovic always does a job for Serbia as well. I think they could impress a few people. And we've seen Switzerland pretty much always qualify for the last 16. So I think they'll struggle too. So I think there'll be a lot of goodwill towards Senegal. And I think that they've got the group that really they should get through more than the other African sides would consider.
And I've not actually plotted the path yet to the next round and the rounds beyond because I don't want to be guilty of arrogance. But have you seen what the next round might look like?
Do you know what? I've done the same. I've ignored it. I've tried not to look through anything, to be honest, because I got into that trap at the Euros of going, right, where do I think we'll end up? And I was convinced England were going out quite early, to be honest. So at the moment, I'm just looking forward to seeing what the group stage holds, and then we'll go from there. It's difficult, isn't it? Because this World Cup is such an odd one. Like you talk about trying to get the time off work and like getting used to the idea of it being in November and December. There's so many problems with it. It feels like we can't enjoy anything in sport these days without something overshadowing it. And when you see that there are, I think, 24,000 human rights violations between the workers and the Qatari stadiums, and instead the powers that be there are coming out with statements saying there are no issues. We've actually improved conditions for our migrant workers. And they're very adamant that if you come, you will learn that actually there are no problems at all. But then when you do come, what you're met with is not the truth at all. And people that are trying to tell the truth are not able to. And it's so hard to be behind this World Cup. So even when the draw came out, you want to be excited, and you are, because it's an international tournament, but there is always that sort of black mark on it that makes you think, I'm not as up for this as I should be, unfortunately. So hopefully it'll be a good tournament and we can focus on the football at least, because we're football fans. But I think it is important that at least we do consider at what cost does this tournament come, really.
I think hopefully this is the last of the sports washing cycle we've seen lately, because it was only 4 years ago that Russia hosted a World Cup, which now seems absolutely unthinkable. So maybe in another 4 years' time, we'll look at Qatar and go, why did we even do that? How did we let that happen? You know, it still feels like a bit of a shock. Even when it was announced, obviously it was unbelievable. But even now it's actually happening, I still can't quite believe that that's been chosen as a host nation for an international tournament.
Whereas the next one, I think the next one is North America, isn't it? So I think it's split across the US, Canada, and Mexico, which would be fantastic.
Amazing,
I really like the sound of that. Like the World Cup being held in Mexico feels right, doesn't it? So
it does, yeah. It's a shame that they have to split it across the whole of the North American continent, to be fair. But
especially with the size of it.
Yeah, true. But I think, like you say, in terms of footballing heritage, a little bit more than Qatar, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So
moving on to final one before we go is the title run-in. So obviously we've already touched on Man City and Liverpool coasting to victories this weekend and every other weekend, it feels like. And it's all down to this head-to-head. Now, it's probably going to be an absolute 0-0 ball draw, which would be such an anticlimax. I don't think it will be. I'll go with you first. What's your prediction for Liverpool-Man City at the weekend?
I ain't got a clue. To be honest, I have not got a clue what to expect. I watched Liverpool-Watford this weekend, and I wasn't overly impressed. I actually thought Watford played quite well. So maybe it's a testament to Liverpool that they managed to come through that anyway. The penalty it's definitely a penalty. It's a foul, but it's just laughable because that happens every single game and is never given. So there needs to be some consistency there. But other than that, Liverpool didn't look really up for it. Salah barely featured in the game. Mane came on and struggled to impact it. I think really they're relying on the fact that Jota is in a very clinical run of form. And I wonder whether he can do that against Man City, because Man City are the strongest defence that Liverpool will face this season. And you could probably say the same about Man City facing Liverpool. These two teams have absolutely run away with the league, and it is going to be so hard to call. If you pressed me, I think City will probably win. I think it'd be narrow, but I think that they've probably got just a little bit more quality than Liverpool in this current moment. But I could be completely wrong.
I agree. I'm probably just hoping that there's the lesser of two evils as a Manchester United fan, that City win it again, to be fair. But I think the only way that Liverpool are going to win that particular game is if they take the lead fairly early on, because we know Man City struggle to come back from being down, especially against the Liverpool team. That'll be difficult to break down. 1-0 early on in the first half an hour will be a tough one to overcome, I think. So that I can see Liverpool taking that and not letting go of it. But I think Man City will do that to Liverpool. I think they'll dictate the momentum early on. I don't think we've seen Liverpool at their best for a little while. They've kind of coasted through games recently, whereas I think City still look impressive even in third gear. They still look like you can't get the ball off them. You know, I think Liverpool might end up chasing shadows for large parts of the game, which could absolutely exhaust them. So
it's difficult, isn't it? Because this game is sandwiched between Champions League ties as well. And will City be thinking about the Atletico Madrid game? And you'd imagine Liverpool are going to overcome Benfica fairly comfortably. So it's so fascinating, this game, and to have essentially the league title riding on it is huge. But there's still what, 8 games to go, 8 games to go for those two teams. So even if this result doesn't pan out, it doesn't necessarily mean things are over. But it's going to be an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, psychologically, I think whoever takes the points, if either team takes any points from it, other than the one, will be a huge psychological advantage. But you're saying City. I think I'm saying City. Watch Liverpool smash them 5-0 now.
Imagine
the way the Premier League goes at the minute.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it for this week's pod. Again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Please do give us some support if you can. Give us a like. That really helps the YouTube algorithm. But also a follow if you're listening on Spotify would be a massive boost to where we appear on people's searches. So, thank you for joining me again, Myles. Can't wait for the weekend's showdown. Really excited to see how the Premier League pans out. And as always, great to talk to you. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, man. See you soon.